We're doing statehood and antebellum notes found on Unit 4, Lesson 3, Number 1. If there's a date on there, disregard. No, okay, good. So you see there's a chapter 5 thing too. You can cross it out because that's actually from the book, the textbook. But in Moodle, it's Unit 4. Okay. So we're going to do fill in the blank notes on antebellum or statehood and antebellum. Thank you so much.
I'm a weird person.
Now, what does antebellum mean?
Before Civil War.
Before the Civil War. Excellent. So take a look at the top here. This is actually going to tell us how we became the 25th state, right? So you might want to underline 25th state or 25th. You see where it says that? It's the heading underneath the title. All right. Now, we already talked about how to organize the territory, and there was lots of conflict with that. There was even a duel. Someone died, right? So there was lots of conflict, but we somehow got organized enough to maybe become a state. So the first blank is the population of Arkansas was growing. Okay? Population is your first blank. In order to become a state, we needed to have a certain amount of people living in it. Okay? So the population was growing. And the U.S. government started giving the territory money for improvements like roads. We talked about how difficult the travel was. So what was the best highway to take? Rivers, for sure. But eventually,
Can I borrow Dylan?
for what?
Twin pictures.
Oh, okay.
I needed to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
They're still out there. It's all right.
Come on. Go. All right, so.
We're not going to get through this thing.
I forgot I could take off.
Yeah, we have like 3 pages.
Yes.
4 pages. 3 pages. Miss Frizzle. Going on the main street.
Miss Frizzle was actually Captain Frizzle.
Or talking about my school bus because I was looking for one.
Okay.
He found a school bus in the Mississippi River.
But why did he?
The boat. It was just on the side.
Oh, I forgot I could take my mask off. Ah,
Miss Frizzle.
yay.
Oh my god.
All right, we'll start back up. Rewind. All right, today we're going to talk about statehood and antebellum. Antebellum means
Or the Civil War.
before the Civil War. That's right. And this first section is going to be talking about the 25th state, and that's us. All right, and we had to meet certain requirements, specifically population. Population. Okay, so that's your first blank. Our population was growing, and we had enough people to finally become a state. All right, and the U.S. government was giving the Arkansas Territory money for improvements, specifically roads and eventually railroads. So Arkansas was like, yeah, let's become a state. Well, the governor at the time, William Fulton, said, I don't think we're quite ready. Okay. Again, the requirements are listed here. A population of 60,000 and earning money from what?
Taxes.
Yeah, from taxing the citizens. That's your second blank, taxing the citizens. So in order for us to become a state, we had to have enough money coming in to actually pay for the things that we needed, like a National Guard or a state militia or fire brigade, those kind of things that were going to take care of the state. Okay. Even among the concerns, though, if you look at that next bullet point, a state constitution was written. That's your next blank, constitution. Do you want me to spell that for you? Okay. The Constitution is the governing document for each state. Now we have a U.S. Constitution that tells us how our federal government is going to be run at the highest level. But each state has a constitution. So once we wrote that constitution, it was sent to Washington, D.C. to be approved. Okay. So, and it has to be voted on. So Congress debates Arkansas statehood. Do you see where that title is? Now, here's the debate. Northern politicians, and that's your fourth blank, Northern politicians wanted to delay. And here's the reason. We don't want more Democrats for Andrew Jackson, because that means Northerners were the Whigs at the time. Okay. Also, they wanted to delay because Arkansas would become a slave state. Okay, so that's really important. So Arkansas would be a slave state.
Why?
Because it's below a certain line called the Missouri Compromise line.
Was
Wait, what, so even if
Missouri
you didn't want to be a slave, they were still slaves? I mean, even if they didn't want slaves, they still had to?
Correct, because the law stated if you were below that line, any new states would become a slave state.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
Anything above it would be a free state. You'll learn more about that next year in U.S. history because it's a big.
Missouri, Kentucky.
Missouri was the exception. It became a slave state. Kentucky was a slave state. This happened in 1820, so those states before the time were already determined slave or free. Okay. Eventually, you see our bullet point? Eventually, Congress allowed Arkansas and Michigan to enter together as states. The law said if a slave state comes in, we need a free state to go in at the same time. And Michigan was that state. So Michigan was a free state if you want to add that somewhere. So there had to be a balance of free and slave states.
Wait, can you tell me what the
Okay.
requirements population is?
Ask your colleagues.
Wait. Number one, population. I got that.
What is it?
the requirements.
First one is population.
I got that
The
taxing.
second one is
Constitution.
taxes. Third one is
Hold on.
constitution.
Thank you.
Wait, what was it?
Northern.
What's the second
Was it
one?
Hamilton?
Taxes.
She told me it was Hamlet, and then she called you
And what's
in
the
Hamilton, and obviously we didn't spell it right.
All right. Now, on June 15th, 1836, that's the year we became the 25th state. June 15th, 1836.
Could we make like any other states now?
Sure, sure.
So there could be a state. How hard is it?
At this point, it's pretty hard. We do have territories. Like Puerto Rico is one of our territories.
Oh, and like the Bahamas.
No, the Bahamas are. We have Guam, American Samoa. These are some special territories of the United States. Though I'm not sure if the requirements have changed or if they even want to become a state. So that there's that.
There'll be more government.
All right. So while we became a state, there were some other things that were happening that we were also a part of. Okay. And one of those things was the Texas Revolution. So obviously we are neighbors to Texas, but who did Texas belong to before it belonged to the United States? Mexico. Okay. So Texas, that's your next blank, was fighting for independence from Mexico. And Kansans, went to help at the Alamo. Why? Pardon me. Because the United States wanted Texas to be a state. And Arkansas wanted Texas as well. And a famous dude named James Bowie was one of those gentlemen.
How do you spell it?
Bowwie.
It's on where the next film in the blanket is. It's right before that.
So James Bowie lived in Arkansas for a time. And while he lived in Arkansas, he created something.
Bowie knife?
The Bowie knife, yeah. So he created the Bowie knife, Knife, also known as the Arkansas toothpick. So there's two variations of this. One on the left there that has kind of the divot in the,
clip.
but the other variation is a straight blade, like dagger looking. Okay. I've always seen the one that has the little divot. What'd you call it?
Point.
The point at it. So, anybody ever been to the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas? Yeah. Did you see one of the Bowie knives there?
About
No, you remember?
6 years.
Yeah. So it's been a while. Yeah, it's kind of cool. They have a list of the names of the people who died there and where they were from, and you can see some of them
It
from
was kind of
Arkansas.
easy. There was only like 100 days.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot, but so they lost at the Alamo, but later there's another battle in San Jacinto, and Sam Houston kind of kicked Santa Anna's rear. So James Bowie, who has a little portrait there on the right-hand side, is he actually died defending the Alamo.
Wait, where?
Yes.
Santa Anna didn't want Texas to be independent.
It was Mexican property.
Yeah. So you know who the first illegal immigrants were? Americans into Texas. All right. So let's take a look at Arkansas's antebellum years. Now, generally, antebellum, like you said, means before the war, and it's usually about 40 years. So if that's not a blank, you need to circle or underline that. Okay. So antebellum, the 40 years before the Civil War are known as the antebellum years. And there were struggles for the new state in 1836, namely the first one being a little green stuff, the money. Money became an issue. I put moolah, okay? So, but money, dollar signs, cash, whatever you want to put in that means money, okay? And that was one of the concerns by Governor William Fulton. He said, we don't have enough money from taxing the citizens. Okay.
Just out of Texas.
Yeah. So money was an issue. So how are we going to pay for government and the services the government gives?
Taxes.
Well, no, they thought of a new solution, and that was to establish two banks.
Tax.
Banks. BANKS. That's your next blank.
Are banks popular back then?
Yeah, they were definitely used. There wasn't one on every corner like there is here.
Weren't there more used for like mortgages and loans?
Right, loans for improving your land, building
Buying.
homes, that kind of thing, and more on the state and the federal level. So for like private citizens, not so much unless you had enough money to be able to pay back a loan.
Otherwise,
So one of the things in our history was called the banking crisis. Yeah, we established these two banks, but it led to not so good things.
fraud.
Okay, so let's take a look at the two banks that were created. The Bank of Arkansas, which was specifically for government and business activity. Okay, so the government was using the Bank of Arkansas for like holding its money, and maybe loaning it out for businesses as well. The other bank that was created was called the Real Estate Bank of Arkansas. Now, whenever you hear the word real estate, what do you think of?
Land.
Like land or like homes.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what it was for buying property, making improvements on that property, or even building a home on it. And generally, this was for wealthy planters. So those who had already had money, already had land, and they wanted to make better improvements on it.
Wait, were farmers did a lot of farmers, were they like really wealthy back then?
Not a lot. I mean, most people were farmers, but they didn't all have huge amounts of land. Sometimes
Yeah,
they just had
lived in the-
small
Who was
amounts of
the
land.
richest person, I think.
Oh, I don't know.
If they lived in the east.
Right, and in the southeast too, because that was where the best land
Slaves.
for farming was. Farming up here, because there's too much rocks in the soil. If you've ever tried to garden or do a huge plant,
It's hard.
it is
Yeah.
extremely difficult.
It's really good in like Iowa or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that one thing like when you like stick it in the ground and you have to like turn it and
An
then
auger.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had to do that for my grandma's because she has like a small like garden, and I also had to do it for my papa's down at like it's down by the river, so there's even more rocks.
Yeah.
It
was
I found
hard.
A huge rock.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the geography really helps determine who's going to move here. Okay. So Northwest Arkansas was not as widely populated as it was in eastern Arkansas because there was better land to farm over there. All right. But unfortunately, both of these banks were both accused of corruption. That's your next blank. CORRUPTION. Now, the root word is corrupt. If something is corrupt or corrupted, what's wrong with it? It's broken. And when we're talking about businesses with people in them, that means the people are using that business in an illegal way to benefit themselves. So,
It's gonna be like fraud and tax evasion.
yeah, that's exactly what that is.
Not
Okay.
really tax evasion. but
Well, sure. A bank can evade taxes. Absolutely. Okay. And it just so happened that bank records disappeared.
also-
Okay, that's your next blank. Disappeared. And if you don't have a record of who owns what or who owes what, that can be a problem. Yes, sir.
With Vantage Point?
Sure. Another thing that they were accused of was that the banks were playing favorites to family and friends. So they were only giving loans out to people that they knew and were friends.
High school favorites.
FAVORITES.
I wonder if you can get
I
a loan
Wonder if they do Alright,
I wonder if you can get a loan from like a bank for like $1 million.
Sure, but you have to prove that you'll be able to pay it back,
The
or
credit.
they're not going to give it to you.
What I would do is like,
You have to have good credit.
I would show that I like a fake credit and stuff, and I have the $1 million.
That's not
Hold on, no, think about it.
that's not legal.
No, just think about it. I take the $1 million, and then the next day I go in and give all the $1 million they gave to me back, and it's like, here, I paid it off already.
Why would you do that? There's
Then
no point
okay.
in doing it in
All right.
the first place.
Moving forward, because of all this corruption and playing favorites, both banks closed. Okay, and it became a huge financial mess, not just for those businesses, but for the whole state of Arkansas.
But
Why?
shouldn't the land records been sent to like Washington?
I have a question. Do government people have to pay taxes?
Oh, absolutely. Every single person
Does the
Every
president?
citizen
who makes money must pay taxes. You pay taxes in sales tax when you buy things.
Does the president?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, he's supposed to.
Do you like?
Oh yeah, I saw that, and it was obsolete.
Yes, ma'am.
So like my grandma, she's like retired, but she gets money from like somewhere every year. So like if like you don't do that, so she doesn't have to pay taxes when she does.
She does, because that's an income.
She's still making money.
social security.
Yeah, Social Security.
Yes, which, a lot of people are like, they're retired, they don't work anymore, they need all the money that they can get. Why are we taxing them? We shouldn't. Well, in my humble opinion, we should not. Because if you're living off your Social Security, there's not enough money to live off of.
No.
But anyway, moving on. So the last line here, does it say politicians? Yeah.
Bernie Sanders.
Politicians were corrupt, including Senator Ambrose Sevier. This was one of the family members, y'all. Ambrose is spelled capital AMBROSE. And his last name, which I'm probably saying incorrectly, it's probably French of some sort, Sevier. Capital SEVIER. And it nearly ruined the reputation.
It's Sevier.
I think that's Sevier. Search it up on
How do you
Sevier. SEVIER.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
it nearly ruined the reputation of some of these people who were associated with these banks. Yeah.
How?
if you were caught cheating,
Well, yeah, but did he snitch them out or did people snitch him out?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, because they started increasing more to the
All right, so let's take a look at some of the results of this banking crisis. The next title says what?
Knife
Knife
fighting
fighting
in
in
legislature.
legislature.
Okay, the legislature is where the General Assembly in Arkansas meets, and that's where they make all the laws. Okay, so there was a knife fight that broke out in the workplace. Okay, this is called the Wilson Anthony stabbing. Okay, so during the General Assembly, where all the senators and representatives meet within Arkansas, a fight broke out between a guy named Wilson who stabbed another guy who named Anthony, and Anthony died. Okay, so literally, Wilson murdered Anthony, and so you're yeah.
You think someone's
What?
gonna take a knife out and go,
Hey.
oops?
Hey, listen. What's your next question? What you should be your next question?
Why?
Why? Okay. So we'll get to that in a second. So Wilson was not convicted of killing Anthony, but he was kicked out of office. I don't know why he wasn't guilty.
Wait, what?
Obviously,
Someone just saw
he
him
just
stab
saw
a guy.
yeah, but he was not found guilty. So what does that tell you about the court system?
It is
Wasn't very
great.
good. Okay.
Obviously.
He returned. He was actually elected back into office a couple of years later and tried to stab someone else.
Oh my god!
Let me guess.
That's so
He's
ridiculous.
gotta stab each other first.
So here's the reason why. Turns out Wilson was the president of the real estate bank who was accused of corruption and playing favorites. And this Anthony guy went after Wilson and called him out for being a cheater.
Went after the bank owner.
Went after bank critics. So Wilson, the guy who stabbed Anthony, was going after those who were criticizing him.
So went after bank.
So yeah,
Kinda
went after
could,
bank
though.
critics. CRITICS.
Very cash money of him.
Was
So one way to get rid of his
enemies or
enemies was to
He
kill him. Apparently,
He should have done it more than Italy. He should have been like, hey, you want
Wow.
lunch?
I don't know.
Hey,
So,
you wanna be classified
cool
as a
thing.
savage?
You can go to the old state house today, which was the capital at the time, and you can go into the General Assembly where the knife fight
And
occurred.
see the blood.
I don't think the blood's there, but it's really cool. Last year I went, and they're like, "This is where the Wilson Anthony stabbing occurred," and I was like,
Or
"Wow,
like
that's cool."
trying to get off,
Yeah,
build
cool.
one,
I think it's
Ponzi
honestly
where somebody
Maybe.
died.
This is mansion and this guy.
Interesting.
I mean, it's not okay. I'll tell you later.
Yeah, that's. So that was happening in Arkansas, but there was something else happening in the United States that eventually will affect Arkansas. And the president at the time was Andrew Jackson. Okay, now we're under Indian removal. So his idea, and he did not like Native Americans, by the way. He called them savages. Many people did back then. All right. Yes. But he wanted to remove Indians for American expansion. Okay. So we just added Arkansas as a state in 1836. This was happening a couple of years beforehand. Okay. There were many groups of Native Americans living in Arkansas at the time, but were then removed because of what Andrew Jackson wanted to accomplish. So in Arkansas, the Quapaw, Seminole, Chickasaw, Seneca, Creek, Choctaw, and Cherokee were removed under a new law called the Indian Removal Act.
I'm 1% Cherokee and 5%.
Awesome.
And the
I think most of us probably, if we're from Arkansas, we probably have most of us have
I'm from
some.
Alaska.
But there's probably Inuit
from
somewhere.
Minnesota.
Bro.
Your aunt
All right,
and
so
my
this
mom.
was in 1830.
Wait,
okay.
what was the one before it?
X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
No, like the
Indian Removal Act.
Yep, Indian Removal Act.
Wait, what?
So even though the law passed in 1830, it didn't take full effect until like 1837 and 1838. So a lot of these Native Americans were forcefully removed from not just Arkansas, but other states like Georgia. So if you see where it says the Trail of Tears, it says many of Georgia's Cherokee refused to move. That's your next blank. Georgia's Cherokee refused to move. And you'll learn more about this next year as well.
Why do they call it Arkansas?
That's a Quapaw Indian name.
Arkansas.
No. In 1838, U.S. troops forcibly removed all the remaining tribes out of Georgia, and they marched them. This is during winter time as well. Okay. And they did that on purpose, hoping something would happen to them,
It's like the Jews.
specifically
Yeah.
death. Okay. They marched for thousands of miles. Okay. No, they didn't have the luxury of hopping in the car or a plane to get where they were going. They had to walk from Georgia to Oklahoma.
But didn't they have like wagons?
Yes, but you had to also use that for supplies.
Yeah, that's
And also
basically
not
what
everyone
happened
had
to the
that. And
Jews.
isn't
Exactly.
it the Trail of Tears also like some goes through Fayetteville?
Yes, and that's what that map is there.
Yeah, I think it's
So they didn't have time to pack. Many of them got sick because it was winter time. Usually the elderly people and the young people are wiped out because of sickness. The money that was actually to help the tribes move actually went to government agents. Like they got the money and then they put it in their own pockets.
Oh, that's kind of cheap.
Kind of. It is.
Cheap.
That's stealing money from the government.
did they get in trouble?
They
for
got
No.
stealing from the government.
Wait,
You know what?
government.
That was
What's
Agents.
very racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4,000. And some people are like, oh, it's only 4,000 people died.
But
That's 2 West Forks. Okay.
That's twice as many people as the Twin Towers. And think how many died there.
Yeah. So we're talking thousands of people are forcibly marched to somewhere where they didn't want to go,
where did
and
they
they
go?
died along the
Did
way.
anyone survive?
No. Did people survive? Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
So-
above that?
If you look at the map here, the gray area is where the Cherokee lived, and then the dotted lines on the map are some of the different routes they took. All of them end up in Arkansas, the
Wait,
northern
what?
part of Arkansas, to get to Tahlequah or Fort Gibson or further into Oklahoma.
What was the one right above that blank right on the Trail of Tears?
How many?
Oh, wait, 4,000.
Yes.
What was the one before 4,000?
What was it before 4,000?
Government agents.
Yeah.
So
if you drive through Fayetteville, sometimes you'll see like a brown marker which says Trail of
Yeah.
Tears on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just to commemorate the travesty, the tragedy of those Native Americans being forced to walk to Oklahoma and survive or not survive. Yes, sir.
Can you walk?
Some people have, yes.
It's
Some people
actually a
bike
hiking
the Trail of Tears. Uh-huh.
I feel,
No, I mean like
I used
the
to think
whole
that Andrew Jackson, right,
Georgia.
like I was like 4 or 5. I was on the $20 bill. I thought it was a girl. I thought it was some sort of judge.
Okay. All right. So that's our part in the Indian removal. So a lot of things that we're going to talk about in Arkansas history, and we have, are things that happened on a national scale, but like what was our part in it? Okay. So Indian removal, a lot of those Native Americans were pushed out of Arkansas along some of these trails, but also a lot of Native Americans from other states had to go through Arkansas to get to the designated area. So there were a lot of people who traveled to and through Arkansas while it was a baby state, if you will. So we're going to talk about Arkansas travelers. Have you heard the term Arkansas traveler?
Yeah.
Do you know about the song?
No,
Yes.
Good, we are going- Oh, good. We're going to listen to it. Okay, tomorrow probably, or maybe the next day.
Hey,
Right.
Arcadian.
And it's not the one by Chris Stapleton. There's a song by Chris Stapleton.
Yeah, I remember.
All right. Now, you'll recognize it when you hear it. You may not have known it was the Arkansas Traveler song. Okay? All right. So, not a lot of those things that we just discussed, like the song, are from people who traveled through Arkansas. And the best accounts of early Arkansas history are accounts from firsthand visitors who wrote about their experience. Okay, and one of those was a guy named George Fanshawe. Now, I know his name looks like Featherstone Haw, but they pronounced it Fanshawe. I don't know why, but that's the way.
Like fan, right? Fan song.
I don't know. All right.
It's American.
So while he was working his way through Arkansas, he was actually working on a geological survey. That is your next blank after his name. Okay?
Just right.
Geological survey. So what is the geology? The study of what?
The earth.
That's
the land.
geography, but geology is the study of the processes that create the land. Okay?
Geology.
So I'm going to read you, let's see, there's a little bit of, oh yeah. So he was sent by the U.S. government to Arkansas specifically to perform a geological survey. So he wrote about his travels and about the rock formations he encountered along the way. One of his passages, though, was his, oh, it's an encounter. I don't know who taught him this, but he said in one passage, Fanshawe wrote about receiving a cup of coffee that was made from burnt acorns.
How do you get burnt?
Listen.
I tried that.
He said he was a little frightened to drink the brew, but he wrote, Colonel Conway rode up and showed us how to get through the operation by nipping his nose with his fingers and swallowing it exactly as if it had been castor oil. Okay, now why you want to drink coffee that tastes like that, I don't know, but maybe so. Now, I do know this, if you eat raw acorns, it's poisonous. And that's why they had to burn the acorns to get the poison out.
Bro, how does squirrel even live?
Because their constitution, their system is totally different than ours.
Dylan,
Okay?
So
humans eat way more types of poison than squirrels.
Yeah.
Chocolate, caffeine.
Well, it's not really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but dogs will die if they eat it.
All right.
No, my dog.
Okay, y'all. It's beside the point. So he's writing of his experience in Arkansas, and that's actually documenting some of the early history of it. Okay. So he also wrote a book called Excursion Through the Slave States, and it's some of the best information about early life in Arkansas. Okay. Another traveler is a German guy named Friedrich Gerstecker. Friedrich Gerstecker. He's a German immigrant, and he kept journals of his journey through Arkansas, and he sent letters to his mom about his travels. And he gathered all his writings years later and wrote a book called Wild Sports in the Far West, and that was specifically about Arkansas. So the book was called Wild Sports in the Far West, which is kind of funny to think that Arkansas would be considered the far west. But in 1836, it was the farthest state out there. They didn't have California, they didn't have Kansas, they didn't have Nebraska.
Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia's east of there.
Do we have Oklahoma?
Wayward son.
They had Oklahoma Territory, but it wasn't a state yet. It was one of the last states to actually become a state. Yeah.
It's like
1907. All right. So one of those things that he wrote about was his encounter with the Choctaw. So let me read you a little bit about when he met them. He said, I turned rapidly in the direction whence the sound came, and had hardly gained the crest of the hill when a romantic scene spread itself before my eyes. It was an Indian camp, and all were occupied in pitching their tents and preparing for the night. I should never have tried of looking at these noble muscular figures, their faces marked with various ochres, which are like yellow paint, their heads adorned with feathers, and their bright colored dresses. Going up to a group of young men who were stretching a deer skin, I asked if any of them spoke English, and was directed to an elderly man who was sitting smoking under a tree and watching me. I told him that I was a traveler and asked if I could pass the night in his camp. Instead of an answer, he silently gave me his pipe. I sat down beside him. He then asked a great many of questions. He spoke English better than I did.
Wait, they used to smoke tobacco in pipes.
Yeah, they still do.
Yeah.
Have you never seen a pipe? Have you never
Oh,
seen a pot
the
pie?
earliest thing. I've never seen. Sorry, okay. I'm half asleep.
It's okay. It's all right.
I know Popeye.
And you shouldn't be criticizing other people for asking questions you don't think are good ones. Okay. Other travelers coming through Arkansas included Charles Noland, who wrote The Spirit of the Times about backwoods culture in the Ozarks. 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 So that he wrote about here, Northwest Arkansas.
I have it at my house.
So Thomas Baines Thorpe was from Massachusetts, and he also traveled through Arkansas, and he wrote a story which I will be reading to you called The Big Bear of Arkansas. Now, did you know that Arkansas, one of its first nicknames was the Bear State? Because we had so many.
Then they diminished. Now we don't.
Yeah. So I think one of the banks, the Bank of Ozarks, has, or Centennial Bank, I can't remember, but one of the banks that's now has a bear on it to recognize that we at
Is it
one
like a short story?
Yeah. that I will be reading to you probably tomorrow. Yeah. So we're going to end with the legend of the Arkansas Traveler. Okay. So this is where a lot of people get the idea that Arkansans are hillbillies or rednecks, which in some cases we are. But I would agree that I would say that in any state you're going to find rednecks and hillbillies.
Yeah,
Hillbillies. Would you agree or disagree?
Especially in
I
Florida.
wouldn't agree. Florida
Because like
Alabama.
I've never met a hillbilly in New York.
Well, have you been to every place in New York?
No.
Okay. So where do rednecks and hillbillies live?
In the farm.
In the country, right?
Probably a lot of people.
Well, these are stereotypes, right? Okay.
Yeah, I heard
So, it doesn't always fit the description. Stereotypes are generally wrong on many levels. Okay. But the story that I'm about to tell you about, and I will, we'll dive into it a little bit later, gave Arkansans a negative image because of this story. So, The Legend of the Arkansas Traveler is actually a work of fiction. So, what is fiction?
not real.
It's not real. Okay. And the story is about a man who got lost looking for civilization. Okay. So, it was created or written by a man named Colonel Sanford Faulkner. Let me spell this for you. No, not Sanders. Okay. Here's how you spell it. Colonel is C-O-L-N. Sorry, no, back up. C-O-L-O-N-E-L. So what does colonel mean in this sense?
It's a rank. Wait.
A ranking
spell
in military.
Military.
Good.
How do you spell it?
C-O-L-O-N-E-L.
What's his name?
Sanford, let me spell it. S-A-N-F-O-R-D. And Faulkner, F-A-U-L-K-N-E-R. It's Faulkner.
So,
F-A-U-L-K-N-E-R. Faulkner. Yeah, she's a teacher.
Wait, how do you get lost if you don't even?
This is a fictional story.
Oh.
Okay. And in the 1830s and 40s, there's a lot of ways you could get lost. There weren't a whole lot of roads back then. Now, he wrote about his encounter with an Arkansas backwoodsman, so hillbilly, and he turned into a tune, which became a comedy routine. Okay, and later it was published into a song and widely played across the nation. So this popular song became heard around the United States, and so when people heard the song,
They didn't want to go right.
well, they had their own ideas about who Arkansans were. So when I grew up, I went on a mission trip to Texas, and it was just our choir from church, and we sang at this church, but we got to spend the night at some of the people's houses, and they knew I was from Arkansas, and one of their children, the child asked me if I knew what a fruit roll-up was, because I was from Arkansas. She also asked me if I knew what a sleeping bag was. Okay?
That's
Yeah, and so I was like,
How old was she?
I don't know, 8 or 9.
But
But even at that age, she had some idea about what an Arkansan was.
a fruit.
And it wasn't.
You should have said, yeah, I've probably eaten more than you.
So whatever their ideas about Arkansas was being taught to the kids as well.
I have a question. What are I don't get like the fruit roll.
Okay, that does nothing to do with Arkansas. Okay, I'm just giving you an example of what other people thought about Arkansas. Okay. All right. So tomorrow we'll look at the painting, and I'll start reading The Big Bear of Arkansas.
We'll finish for the next
It's one of my, yes, we'll finish these this week.
No, you can't.
Okay.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, but it's okay.